Here research from Emily Glotfelty. So they are going to talk about variation in food availability and ranging behaviors in Colobus vellerosus across population density conditions. So Emily, welcome again, and please start as you would like.
Yes, thank you. So I'm Emily Glotfelty, a doctoral candidate at the University of Texas, San Antonio down in the US. So today I'm going to be talking about some preliminary analysis we have with the Colobus vellerosus. So to begin, we know that changing population dynamics, such as increasing population density, can intensify resource competition both within and between groups. So as we get more individuals sharing these same resources, that competition can get higher. But we don't expect for groups to have the same experience with the increasing population density on resource competition. We do expect that groups that are a lower competitive ability might have to increase their behavioral strategies to cope with the resource competition at a higher level than the more competitive groups that may just be able to maintain better access to these preferred resources, even in a high population density condition. So for this study, I am looking at specifically the changes in ranging patterns within the Colobus vellerosus as they are coping with a increasing population density and looking at this potential mediating impact of a group's competitive ability. So my study population is located in Bobang, FEMA, in central Ghana. So on the map here, their forest fragment, the dark green area is about 1.92 kilometers squared. So it's a pretty small forest, and it's nestled between the villages of Bobang at the bottom and FEMA at the top. They are sharing this forest with another diurnal primate species, the guinean monkeys, and these are the largest mammals occurring in this forest fragment. So they have no natural predators in this area either. So this Colobus population has been continually studied since the year 2000. And over this time, we have seen their population density more than double. Although in our most recent population survey conducted in 2022, we do see a little bit of a decline in their numbers. For a little background on the Colobus themselves, so they are a social, non-territorial primate species living in groups of up to 38 individuals, and they have some variation in these group compositions with either multi-male, multi-female groups or single male, multi-female groups. They are typically arboreal, although we do see in this picture they'll come to the ground to feed, and they are highly folivorous with an annual diet of about 74% of leaves. And they have a lot of adaptations towards this folivory diet. In the Colobus at this site, we do see evidence for both intra-group competition, especially seasonally, with their preferred food items, such as young leaves, fruits, seeds, flowers, peaking in availability during their dry season in the months of November to April. And we also see a lot of intergroup competition, so that between group competition going on. And we've even seen this increase both in occurrence and in level of aggression in the earlier years between 2000 and 2009, as we were starting to get that increase in population density. So this project is looking further at some of their changes in behavior with this increase in population density and potential intensifying of that resource competition. So specifically, the first aim of this project was to determine whether population density and/or a group's competitive ability could predict ranging patterns. And here I have it split up into 3 population density conditions. So the low population density spanning the years of 2001 to 2005, on up to 4 study groups, medium population density condition in the years 2007 and 2008, with up to 7 study groups, and then the high population density condition in 2023 and 2024 on 4 study groups. So specifically, I was focused on 2 ranging behaviors, their daily travel distance and their low forest strata use, so how often they are going on the ground and using and expanding that vertical niche. What we expected to find were all groups to have a longer daily travel distance or using this low forest strata more often in this high population density condition. So as that resource competition gets higher, they're going to have to change their ranging patterns to access enough food resources for all their group members, either by traveling further in the day or again by expanding that vertical niche and coming down and using some of those low plants for food. But we did expect that this degree of change will be higher in groups with a lower competitive ability. For this population, our lower competitive groups are typically our large multi-male groups. So males are the primary participants in these intergroup encounters, and the single male groups, those males typically have a stronger fighting ability and tend to win these intergroup encounters more often. So how we specifically address this first aim. So we have location points recorded for a group center of mass at either half-hour or hour intervals during full-day group follows. And we only looked at the months of June and July. So this is during their lean season or that period of low food availability. And these location points are recorded using their large tree map. So this forest is pretty small. So we're able to map, identify, and measure all of the large trees. So having a DBH or diameter at breast height of 40 centimeters or greater. And so we use this tree map to record their locations throughout the day. Then once we have these location points, I calculated daily travel distance as the sum of straight line measurements between the location points throughout the day. And I also controlled for daily observation hours. Our full day group follows ranged from either 8 hours to 12 hours, so I wanted to take into account this difference in observation hours. For the low location points, they're recorded as low if they are not within one of these large map trees. And we only had this data available to use for the medium and high population density conditions. And we analyzed these two ranging behaviors using general linear mixed models with a fixed effects population density condition, group size and group male composition for that group competitive ability. We included average temperature just to control for changes in seasonality through the years, and then also those random effects of group identity and year. And what we ended up finding, so first, with this daily travel distance, we do see groups in the high population density condition having these longest daily travel distances. So when they're under the high population density, having more of that resource competition, they're having to travel further, either to avoid encountering their neighboring groups or just to access enough food for all their group members throughout the day. We did see a small impact of single male groups having a longer daily travel distance. This does go against our initial predictions. Since our single male groups typically are winning more of the encounters, we expect them to maintain areas of higher resource quality, and so wouldn't have to travel quite as far to feed all their group members. What might be explaining this trend we see here is we have an unusual group that is existing in this high population density condition that is only 3 individuals, so 1 male and 2 females. So it's pretty unusual for this species where their groups tend to average around 7 to 15 individuals. And so this really small group is the 2 highest travel distance measurements in the single male that we can see on this plot here. So they might be driving this pattern going on. And then lastly, we did not see any significant relationship between low forest strata use and population density or with group competitive ability, although with the proportion of low location points, there could potentially be this interactive effect of the group competitive ability and population density. So working in that synergy and exacerbating their experiences of this crowding and higher resource competition. So the first aim was to look at these ranging patterns, but we also wanted to see how this ended up affecting a group's access to food. So that's where our second study aim comes in. So we wanted to explore whether population density and or a group's competitive ability predict that group's access to food. So here we're using a little bit of a smaller sample size with just comparing the low population density condition with that of the high population density condition, and focus just on this one variable, the group's food availability, or what food is in that group's home range. So we predicted that food availability will be lower for all groups in this high population density condition, as well as being lower in the multi-male groups, again, because they're a lower competitive ability. So to address this second aim, we took our location points the same as used in aim 1, again recorded in June and July to create home ranges with 95% kernels using that reference smoothing parameter. And on the screen I have depictions of their home ranges across the years 2000 to 2024. So our groups, they do vary both in the size of their home ranges and how much overlap they have in their home ranges. So we do see quite a bit of variation going on in what these groups have access to within these ranges. For getting this food availability measure, we do have monthly tree phenology surveys that are collected at this site year-round. So these monthly surveys consist of using a 4-point scale based on plant part abundance. So we record both the leaves, fruits, flowers, and seeds in this measure. For the leaves and how they are scored, I have this graphic to help explain it here, but for the leaf coverage, it's scored from bare to full, depending on how much leaf cover is on the canopy for what is normal for that species. And then for the other plant parts, their scoring is based off of the proportion of ripe to unripe of those plant parts available. And this is recorded for up to 5 randomly selected individuals of each known food tree within our group's home ranges. And we create this food availability index by summing up these mean phenology scores, multiplying it by those trees, diameter at breast height, and then dividing it by the group size. So this food availability index is only taking into account their preferred plant parts, so the young leaves, the fruits, the seeds, and the flowers, as well as only incorporating the food species that are considered important in their diet. And we defined our important food species as those contributing to at least 5% of their annual diet in any of the study groups in any of these study years, when we ended up with 23 of these important food species. We analyzed this data using a Mann-Whitney U test with that predictor variable population density condition, either high or low, as well as that male group composition with that outcome variable food availability index. What we ended up finding with this is that food availability was lower in the high population density condition. Again, as expected, as we get more individuals sharing the same resources, but it was not significantly related to the male group composition. So here again, if we look at this figure, we do see some interesting patterns going on in terms of male group composition and their food availability index differing within these population density conditions. That is a relationship we would want to explore a little bit further with more detailed intergroup data going on to really piece together which groups are winning these encounters more often. So the median population density condition, we do see that expected relationship with single male groups having the highest food availability. But for both our low population density and our high population density condition, we don't see a strong relationship either way, suggesting maybe even a potential quadratic relationship going on between a group's competitive ability and their access to food. So again, we'd want to explore this a bit further using the full behavioral data that we have from 2000 to 2024, and going a little bit more detailed into these group competitive ability. But to conclude, we do see that groups are able to cope with the changing population dynamics through altering their ranging patterns. However, it is unclear whether these behavioral responses will allow individual group members to maintain high levels of fitness in the face of this increasing intergroup competition, and how a group's competitive ability might mediate this experience of crowding and resource competition under these changes in population density. So to wrap up, I do want to acknowledge all the people, all the monkeys that went into this project. So my advisor, Dr. Wickberg, and all our lab mates, all our research collaborators and assistants in helping collect the data, the Ghana Wildlife Division and Boabang Pima Monkey Sanctuary for permission to do this work, and then all of our funding sources down at the bottom here. But thank you all for listening, and I think we're ready for questions.
Well, that was a great research, and congratulations on your results. Uh, so we already have a few questions. So Tang is asking, what specific strategies do lower competitive groups use to adjust their ranging patterns in response to high population density?
Yes, so we do see potentially different strategies going on that we do want to further explore with some of our lower competitive groups. We see some of them ranging further into the farmland. So our forest fragment that are working at in Boabang FEMA, it's surrounded by farmland. And so some of our really low competitive groups over time have shifted their range away from the primary forest into using more of the secondary area. We also see, so our really unusual group with just the 3 individuals, we see them using lower forest strata much more often than some of our other groups are. And so we do see when they're having their big neighboring groups coming close to them, they'll drop down lower and feed on some of the lower plants. That is another potential strategy that they are showing. And then finally, we are seeing them. So not only do they border farmland, they do border these 2 villages. And we see groups going out into the village and eating some of the shrubs and plants on the ground out in the village as well. And so that's another strategy that can work well to avoid your neighboring groups going out into that village area.
So next question is by David. Are the test groups competing with any other species for the food resources? Is it possible that this could affect the availability of foods?
Yeah, this is a great question. So we do have another primate species at this forest. They do have a little bit of a different diet. The guinean monkeys prefer fruits. They're primarily frugivorous. And so they might compete over some of the fruits and the seeds with the guineans. As far as the leaves themselves, we saw an interesting potential source of competition with some of the sheep at the area. So when they're coming to eat on the low ground plants, they're feeding right next to the sheep that people own at the area as well. And so there could also be competition with some of the livestock going on in the area. But as far as other species in the forest, there's not too many aside from birds and reptiles that aren't really competing quite as a higher level with the Colobus, but it would be really interesting to see how the guinean population, they're also increasing in size. And so that could, again, be an extra component intensifying resource competition. And then also maybe some of the sheep or the other animals eating those ground plants that they could potentially be competing with as well.
So another question by Tang. Uh, how does the presence of multiple males in a group impact the group's competitive ability, especially in the context of resource competition?
Yes, so this is a little bit of a different pattern than we might see in other species. So typically we think of a larger group having a larger resource potential holding, and so being more competitive. What we contribute our pattern with the single males is that the multi-male groups might be suffering from that collective action problem. So we have multiple individuals that might not be contributing to these intergroup encounters at the same level. Maybe they expect their fellow male to do a lot of the work, and then neither end up really participating in the intergroup encounter. So we do see potential collective action problem occurring. Also, for this species, the males always disperse from their natal groups. And so we do think that our single male groups, that male is able to monopolize this group because they are of that stronger fighting ability. And so they're just much more strong in general, and then are the only ones participating in that encounter, and so have to give their full effort into winning that intergroup.
Uh, as we are running out of time, there's one more final question by AB. Great talk. I have a methodological question. You mentioned that you use 5% as a threshold for characterizing important food species. Why 5%? Would choosing a different threshold change your results?
Yeah, so this 5% marker, it is a little bit arbitrary. It's something that is typically used within primate species as either 1% or 5%. So I ended up choosing the 5% because with our tree phenology surveys, unfortunately, a lot of their food species, especially ones that they're eating now, are not represented in this phenology survey, either because they are maybe a vine or a shrub that is not, of course, a tree that is large enough to map and measure. And so I wanted to include as many of these potential important food species as possible. So there is definitely a lot of room for how or what species we're including really impacting this food availability. So changing that percentage is a big one for the important food species. Also finding a way to incorporate some of these non-tree plants that are consuming a high percentage of their diet is also something we're looking to do in the future and figuring out that method as well.
Well, thank you again for your great talk. And I'm sure people are going to have more questions. And if anyone has more questions, please post it to Discord. And I'm sure Emily would be happy to answer them.